BT sponsored Tate Online. I know you made some interactive video for that sponsorship. Can you tell me about the time you filmed Tracey Emin, please?
Okay, so what we wanted to do for Tate was create something online which would let you look at the works of kind of modern British artists and also talk to the artists who had created those works and hear what the artists had to say about the particular works that you were able to look at online. Now, in terms of the way that the works were displayed, in a sense, the key thing was we wanted to make something which felt like you were actually looking at the works in real life. That one thing that really bugs me about the presentation of art online is it tends to be text and JPEGs on a web page. So you have this text and you have the little kind of thumbnail picture and maybe you can click on it and make it a big picture. Well, that's fine, but it's still what you're seeing in front of you is not like you're actually looking at artwork in real life. It's like you're looking at a website in real life. We wanted to create something where what you were seeing was a picture that, as far as possible, filled the entire screen. It shouldn't be a static picture, it should be video, so that you had this kind of feeling of liveness that video has as opposed to still photographs. And you should be able to kind of explore those works, look at them in details, look at them from multiple angles and so on. So that was one part of the Tracey Emin project. But obviously the other part, which was really interesting, was an interview with Tracey herself. Now, again, the idea with the interview was that what we felt was that linear videos as they have existed on television since, the Second World War, linear interviews, in fact, like this one we are doing ourselves, I mean, they're fine in some ways, but what is your involvement? Your involvement sitting looking at this event that's going on here. You're a bystander. Now, that is not what conversations are like normally in real life. You're not a bystander in a conversation. You're actually doing the conversation. You have eye contact with the subject of the conversation, with the person who you're interviewing, that you're talking to. So what we wanted to do was create something online which was like that, so that the subject would be looking straight at you and asking you questions. And so that was the idea behind the Tracey Emin interactive interview piece. Now, but Tracey Emin, she has many friends and many kind of people who admire her and who are kind of incredibly impressed by her work. But also, as I'm sure she will be the first to say, I mean, there are plenty of people who do not regard themselves as fans of her work. And so she's lived with, and she's, obviously lived with some kind of incredibly bitter personal attacks on her work and on her as a person, in very, high profile places. So when she came to do the interview at Tate, it was interesting because initially she had this sort of really sort of hostile sort of energy. It was really like you felt that she felt, okay, here I am and I'm going to meet some media guys. And, I got to be careful, I got to, you just can't trust these people. They're always trying to pull one over on you. And so there was this very sort of hostile sort of kind of force field of sort of, you better watch out or you just better watch out, that's all, was definitely the feeling when you got when she came. So she came along and we got her to do the commentary on the works that were on display at that time at Tate Britain and which were the subject of the sort of interactive exploration part of the site. And then we did the interview with her. Now, the interview was the first interactive interview that I'd done in a sort of formal way for a client like Tate. And it was interesting because what always happens when you do interactive interviews is that famous people don't have a lot of time. So you always send off these documents to them explaining what's going to happen, but they never have time to read them. So always it's up to you to explain what is going to happen actually right there on the ground. And all those documents you've sent through explaining it with nice pretty pictures, they've never looked at them, so that doesn't make any difference. And that was the case with Tracey. So we explained it to her, and so she started speaking and she started doing it, and she was wonderful because she I mean, oh, she's an incredibly good speaker and has this, very sort of fascinating look about her and very sort of fascinating personality. But the kind of format that we were doing was a very simple interactive interview, much simpler than the later ones I did. But the kind of format was that, she would ask you a question like, do you think I'm emotionally committed to my work? And then up would pop 2 buttons, yes or no. Now, we weren't actually responsible for those questions, and a question like that, I would say, is much too simplistic and on the nose. But taking that as an example, so if you clicked on no, I don't think you're emotionally committed to your work, then she says on the piece, she says, well, I think you do not understand my work at all and suggest you examine it again very closely. And, this way that she says it makes it quite clear that she would punch you in the face if she could, but, sadly you're at home with your computer, so she can't. On the other hand, if you click on yes, she goes, yes, of course I am. I love my work. I get really, there was this piece of work and she tells this lovely little story about this blanket she made, and, she cried when she sold it because, all this sort of, and it's an interesting story. Now, I believe that she has referred to this interview that we did with her later and has said how much she enjoyed doing it and how good she thought the results were. And that doesn't surprise me, because the interviews that I've seen that she's done where she's talking about art in a normal kind of linear interview format like this, in those interviews, in a sense, she's having to speak to her enemies and to her friends at the same time. And so what happens is that, in my opinion, what she says often kind of falls between 2 stools, because she's kind of sort of trying to, play it down the middle and, play to her friends, but without, but the people who don't like her work, she's got to deal with them. It's all just a mess. It just doesn't really work, in my opinion, with the interviews that I've seen. Whereas with this format, she could either speak to her enemies, tell them to get stuffed, or she could speak to her friends and tell them, and really kind of open her heart, because she has this incredibly, obviously intense emotional, connection, and she can give you that, and she can sort of open her heart and be much more kind of frank and forthcoming. Now, the other thing, of course, though, about this format is that she is the interviewer, and this is something that I've, that with well-known people, especially controversial well-known people, whenever they go into an interview situation, they always have to be aware that, they don't know the interviewer, and the interviewer's best interests are not necessarily their best interests. And certainly for someone like Tracey Emin, that's absolutely the case. There are many interviewers who would love to trip Tracey Emin up and, make her look stupid. And so I think another part of the reason why that interview worked with her was because she was in control of it. We were just saying, okay, here are the questions, okay, so please read this question. Okay, now please, what would you say if someone answered that question by pressing the yes button? Great, thank you. Okay, what would you do if someone answered that question pressing the no button? Great, thank you, and then on to the next thing. So I think the other reason why it worked with her is because she was in control of that situation, and as a result, she gave a terrific performance.